I'm Betty Solonik, CEO and founder of Accelerate Investors. Welcome to our podcast, Chief Investment Officer Conversations, which brings to you what is on top of mind for the world's leading CIOs. In our conversations, we will explore their background, their current investment strategies, and their global outlook. Welcome to part 2 of my interview with Jonathan Grabel, Chief Investment Officer of the Los Angeles County Employees Retirement Association, LACERA, a $70 billion pension fund with 165,000 beneficiaries. In this episode, he shares with us how LACERA ensures that it is seeing the best investment opportunities, his thoughts on active versus passive investing, and in this episode, listen to the CIO to CIO question from Charmel Maynard, CIO of the University of Miami. Before we get started, I would like to invite everyone to join us for our Southwest Investor Insights Summit in Austin on March 31st. Please go to accelerateinvestorsny.com for more information. Now on to the episode. I hope you enjoy. How are you ensuring that LACERA is seeing the best investment opportunities out there?
As you can tell, I guess if I had a superpower, maybe that superpower isn't giving direct answers. So I'll answer it in a variety of ways. In terms of diligence, I would say that our diligence is better than ever. And it may be, the pandemic is a horrible thing that society has been through. But there have been some silver linings, and maybe one of those silver linings is the diligence that we've done here at LACERA, in that, we're all working in a remote environment. And as a result, we've had more people involved in diligence, in underwriting. Rather than sending one person to visit a prospective manager, wherever that manager was, we can have 2, 3, 4 people on phone calls, multiple phone calls, have those phone calls with different folks rather than showing up to a meeting and having that be kind of very orchestrated. It's much more natural and organic, these shorter kind of burst type of meetings. And having multiple participants, I believe that we challenge one another in a way that we never have. So I think that's a potential silver lining. We have, through our video chat platform, in some sense, it's a knowledge management platform such that we can share, edit, curate, look at documents real time with one another. And I think that's really helped our diligence, and we can share one another's notes. But as it relates to the other aspect of your question, making sure that we see the best opportunities, that's something that we always want to do. It's something that is aspirational and is something that we should always improve. We think that part of our plan here is to increasingly cast as wide a net as possible. And we do that. One of the ways that we put in place over the last year a board-approved plan called LACERA Tide, which stands for Towards Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. In LACERA Tide, there are 5 pillars to it, starting with what is most within our control, and that's our internal team, going to due diligence, active ownership, capital formation, which includes emerging managers, but also all managers, and then industry advocacy. And we believe that through all aspects of LACERA Tide, we are able to find as many opportunities as possible. It's really increased the depth and breadth of our discovery. Part of that also, what I mentioned before, is that we embrace technology. So we are using various platforms in order to really uncover opportunities. We are working with our consultants to the extent that they have opportunities. We're trying to grow our emerging manager programs. We speak at lots of different conferences in order to, say, hey, LACERA, we're open for business. During the pandemic, just towards that point, we made commitments during the pandemic to managers we've never met in person. I think our due diligence, may have been better than ever, but it wasn't, some plans may have said, you know what, we're sticking with our core, whatever. We know them, we're comfortable with them. It's comfortable, it's good. Whereas we've challenged ourselves. So we've made new commitments. So I think that's something that I'm really excited about, all the work that we've done in order to really make sure that we are seeing the best opportunities, talking to as many people as possible, because we believe from that exercise, we'll be able to cull the best set in order to, once again, to get back to our fiduciary duty to maximize outcome for our members.
Thank you. And you mentioned this as well, herd mentality. How do you actively avoid it?
And there are people that have probably won Nobel Prizes that can answer that question as to why that's prevalent. And maybe I haven't won a Nobel Prize. I've probably read books from people who have, or seen people on TV. And, there's no such thing, I guess, as osmosis that, helps me avoid it. But I would say that we recognize that investments is about the unknown. And an easy way to position oneself, one organization against the unknown is to follow trend, stay with the pack. If you're kind of a turtle, you kind of keep in your head really close such that you can pull it back under the shell. So I think that it's really easy to do that because no one's going to criticize you for following the herd. What I think is absolutely critical, and this is something that, I mentioned at the beginning, I've had, in effect, different careers from being an accountant to a banker to a private equity investor to a public pension plan chief investment officer, is that you have to run your own race. And I would, really applaud the LACERA board for doing that. I think that we don't spend our meetings focused on what everyone else is doing. We focus on what we're doing in order, and that, once again, I keep saying it, but it's about our mission to members. But we don't do things just because other people are doing it. With that said, and there's a caveat that it's important to know, to benchmark, to understand what others are doing. And from that list of all the things that people are doing, we can select, what we should do. But I think our ultimate goal, and we put together a strategic plan with the board, is to really migrate and morph what LACERA does from being, a passive allocator where you just delegate every decision to being a strategic, engaged, best-in-class investor where we're making decisions, such that I guess the best way to avoid the herd is to be an active, engaged, best-in-class investor as opposed to someone that just delegates decisions to others and is focused on playing defense in order to not be criticized. We're playing offense to be great. We want to win, not by putting in the prevent defense. We just want to be best in class.
Thank you. And you said investing is about the unknown. And LACERA currently has a private equity manager separate account request for proposal underway. And in looking at the requirements for that, it consists of having an established track record and having previously committed to a certain amount of capital. And these types of requirements are the norm for asset owners when identifying any new investment partner. So then back to what you said about the unknown, how does an asset owner ensure that it is investing in the best new ideas and allocating capital to new firms that may be outperformers? And also, you mentioned LACERA's Toward Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity program as well. So how do you open those doors when you have these types of requirements?
Sure. And I'll talk about a couple of the pillars in LACERA Tide. In capital formation, we're focused on emerging firms as well as established firms. And established firms are critical for firms to emerge, because professionals, entrepreneurs need to have proper net worth in order to take that big step to be an entrepreneur, to create a firm that hopefully will be the next great firm. In order to do that, and what the role is of those established firms is to make sure that they have adequate pipelines, that they hire, I use the phrase cast a wide net, that they're hiring not just from the same 5 schools and the same people in those 5 schools. And then once firms address pipeline, you have to make sure that there's advancement. You don't want, people to pay lip service and just saying, yeah, we're bringing some people in, but who may be more diverse, greater representation of historically underrepresented groups, but for there to be no advancement. Mid-career, executive level, board level, that's absolutely critical. That's the role of established firms. And from that, there will be the firms that look to collect capital to invest from organizations such as LACERA will hopefully present us with the best ideas, because fundamentally we believe, and it's in our investment policy statement, that diverse, equitable, inclusive teams produce better outcomes. So we fundamentally believe that. What we also do as part of our TIDE initiative, and this is under the due diligence pillar, is, and we've been doing this for, since 2018, we've been collecting data from all firms, EEO1 data as a baseline, but we ask firms to disclose more. We ask firms outside the U.S. to disclose data where possible. But it's not just disclosure of data, because we do need to establish a baseline, but we look at policies. We look at, do firms have diversity policies? And is that policy reported up to HR? Or is it the executive office? Or is it a board of directors? And to the extent the board of directors takes ownership of that, well, that speaks really highly of that level of commitment. And once again, that will lead to better outcomes. That's a core belief of LACERA, and it's not a belief where we kind of hit the easy button and say, yeah, we kind of believe it. Here's this 2% allocation. No, this is everything in the portfolio. This has to be everything in the portfolio. So as it relates to specifically our emerging manager program, we've had emerging manager programs for a generation at this point. We're continuously looking to make them better. We have a combination of approaches in different asset categories. Some we may do directly and, issue an RFP, or look to manage it internally. Others may be done through a separate account with LACERA specific business rules, such as the private equity program that you referenced. And part of how we underwrite those, in effect, managers of managers, those separate accounts, is to make sure that they are attentive to what's important to us and that they're not paying lip service in order to make us feel good about a core belief of ours, that is a critical component to our underwriting. And it's important to the board. It's important to the investment team. And once again, going back to my superpower of digressing, our LACERA TIDE initiative has had a groundswell of support amongst the investment team. There call it 40 of us today. And of those 5 pillars, we've divided into teams. And just about everyone is on a team, engaged, looking to advance each pillar. And we have monthly updates. We talk to one another about how we advance it, because there's tremendous interplay between it. But we believe, now I'll go back to the gist of your question about our emerging manager program in private equity. We've been working with a New York-based firm for I guess it's a decade at this point. We've had different instances of our private equity emerging manager program. We've managed it internally. We've done it externally. And right now, where we are with private equity going from a target of 10 to 17%, that's requiring kind of all hands on deck. And this may be an area where we can look to specialists to help us with the goal of finding great firms early in their life cycle, firms that are hopefully more diverse than those firms, that were created 20 plus years ago. And that as those firms grow, they graduate from our emerging manager program into the LACERA main private equity portfolio. But the program's been very successful, and that we hope that its success continues and grows from here.
Thank you. And I will come back and touch on some of the themes that you mentioned later on in our conversation, but I want to come back and focus a little bit more on your investment portfolio. And you already mentioned this as well. What are your thoughts on active investing versus passive investing?
And we have taken, and this is actually one of the benefits of a functional framework. And that concept that I mentioned earlier of all other things being equal, you want to invest in the most liquid, least levered, lowest risk version. Maybe there's one other dimension, and maybe it's also the version or instance of that investment where you have the most governance rights. So we've put in place risk systems that we haven't had in the past, and our ultimate goal is to get to an area where we're more, of a risk budgeting framework, where if the dispersion of returns of active managers is greatest in private equity compared to public equity, well, maybe we want to allocate more of our risk budget to private equity, and just to build on that a little bit. If you look at the dispersion of returns between the first and third quartile in private equity, if that's 1,000 basis points, in some sub-strategies like venture, there may be some persistence. Whereas in public equity, if that spread is single-digit basis points with less persistence, well, maybe that's a better area for passive investment. And that's reflected in our private or public equity portfolio, for example, where it's 60% indexed, 20% or so factors, 20% or so in active strategies. And one of the areas that we're evaluating is, do we bring the passive sleeve in-house, maybe save on fees there in order to, once again, add to our risk-adjusted returns, recognizing there are different risks with internal management. But I think that there are areas where active management makes sense. There are other areas where passive makes sense. I think you have to look at it at the total portfolio perspective, allocate your risk budget in effect where active has the most benefits. And one other way that we do this, not just having risk systems, but something that the board reviews is what we call structure reviews, where we'll look at our functional categories and see how they're implemented, and look at how they're implemented compared to targets, look at how they're implemented compared to the opportunity set, look at how they're implemented compared to trends. So if we're looking at our global equity portfolio as part of our growth structure review, we can look at how our active managers are doing, for example, compared to the passive. And so I think that it's a very easy thing to say, oh, active's better, passive's better. It's more complicated, as everything with investments is, but I think that passive plays a role, active plays a role, and ultimately the risk-adjusted compensation should be considered as part of that evaluation.
Is there a particular or specific investment strategy area that you're finding interesting right now that you would like to explore more and maybe increase your allocation to?
Well, we've increased our allocations to private equity, as you mentioned. I would say, and we've also increased, as you've mentioned, Betty, our allocation to infrastructure.
Right.
I think infrastructure is a great investment for public pensions for something that is, long dated assets with long dated liabilities. Well, that's pretty attractive to have kind of that duration match. What I would say, and hopefully there's someone listening, there aren't enough infrastructure funds out there. So maybe if we kind of connect a couple of the threads about emerging managers, fund formation, I just hope that as someone that's looking to deploy capital, that we have more opportunities in infrastructure than we currently have, because there's a paucity out there. And much of the investment opportunities are just mammoth mega funds. And not all the opportunities should be in mammoth mega funds. There's a lot beneath that. So I will flip the question a little bit in terms of what I hope we have to evaluate is many more real asset type of funds out there as we construct our portfolio. But I think that we've been in an environment with massive monetary stimulus. Recently, there's tremendous fiscal stimulus, coupled with that. And not that I'm predicting the future, but I think that the future is going to be different than the last decade, where 60-40, 65-35, 70-30, that kind of that pure beta portfolio worked. I think that we will be in an environment where that hopefully rewards skill. And I think that skill inures to the benefit of LACERA's members, because I think we've got a really skillful team here. And so I'm just trying to come up with, what's the most exciting thing that, we can look at. I think that there's tremendous innovation globally. I think that, but, I feel really good about our allocation and maybe the areas that we're increasing, maybe those that I'm most excited about, be it, infrastructure, be it private equity, be it some illiquid credit strategies. And across all those categories, I believe and I hope that all those firms, those managers, investment opportunities, are more attentive to other considerations that we've discussed, be it, ESG considerations and others, because I think that that's where, that is maybe a different type of alpha that we're going to capture, over the next decade.
That makes sense. And the news also about Exxon bringing on new board members that are focused more on our climate change. And I think it's about sustainable investments.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
And we've already talked a little bit about this, but I do want to shift the conversation to human capital. I've had the pleasure of getting to know various members of your investment staff and also your trustees. Many of them have been speakers at Accelerate Investors convenings. LACERA does have a diverse makeup of investment staff, and it's worth noting that LACERA in particular has a number of Latinas in investing and decision-making roles, which unfortunately is not common. Latinas are a group of people that are highly underrepresented, including among underrepresented groups in institutional investment management. So I'm curious, how do you evaluate a firm's human capital and how reflective it is of, for example, LACERA's members, especially when you're in a request for a proposal?
Sure. And, human capital may be my favorite topic. So I appreciate the question. I appreciate what, Accelerate Investors does. I think that this is, once again, this is the discussion, of our times in many ways. And, I'll keep going back to LACERA Tide. I think that it is a multidimensional approach that our fiduciary duty compels us to have. Our fiduciary duty compels us to maximize risk-adjusted returns. And to do that, we want to have the best capital, human capital, and otherwise, deploy it in investments in order to pay benefits. And diverse teams have better outcomes. So it's something that we as it relates to the question about diverse teams, our team at LACERA is diverse. The teams I've worked with in other places have been diverse teams. So it's something that, I philosophically, fundamentally believe in. I think that makes me a better person in that I'm surrounded by people that, question, challenge my thoughts because my frame of reference may be different. So it starts with kind of our internal practices. But, towards your question about, due diligence, we track data, we request data, and it says something to me about a firm that doesn't want to provide us data, about the makeup of their team. And once again, I recognize that in different geographies, you can't share information. So I think that we have a good baseline. I think we need to get better information as it relates to the, LGBTQ plus community. I think that's really important. But so we gather data. As I mentioned, we look at policies that companies have, firms have, and make sure that it's with the ultimate decision makers that those policies, where the accountability is. But it's something that, and this, so, we have Tide, but it also translates into tangible actions where every recommendation that goes to the Board of Investments has a separate section on diversity, equity, inclusion. It provides data about the demographics of an organization, but also discusses, some policies that they have. And in some sense, we've been able to agitate for change. And firms that may not have realized how important this is to institutional investors, and maybe this goes back to your question about public pensions and some of the good that we do, we have been constructive in order to position firms to be even more successful by virtue of growing their team. And once again, that notion of pipeline advancement and ownership ultimately. But this is something that we are firmly committed to. It's in every recommendation. And I mentioned the manager scorecard also. We are in the process of separating from the operations of an organization score, maybe a separate tied pillar in that scorecard to demonstrate and flag and highlight an organization's commitment or lack of commitment. And because it really is part of the discourse that we have here.
Thank you. And I heard that you're asking the questions and measuring. I am curious though, how do you hold them accountable, or are there consequences if they aren't broadening their aperture of human capital?
And ultimately the board holds me accountable. And so I am accountable for the portfolio, for monitoring our business partners. And part of the board ratification of our Tide initiative is an annual update. So Tide isn't something that we set, it's a journey, it's continuous. And, the best is yet in front of us. And part of collecting data is to look at trends, metrics, to see how we compare year over year as it relates to the diversity, at firms, to, our capital formation pillar, what, our emerging manager programs look like. But it's something that, we plan on giving the board the right data and putting a spotlight on it. And, it's public what we do. So this is something that people can look at in terms of how we're holding firms accountable. And it's also by getting involved in forums and conversations, such as with, Accelerate Investors, just to make sure that we amplify our voice and that other investors amplify their voice. Because, one of the things that I've noticed over the last couple of years is that the discussion of diversity is no longer kind of an outlier or a strange ask. I think that it's almost an expectation, and which is a good thing. And I mean, you look at ILPA, the diversity in action, we were an early signer to that. And the number of firms that have signed on to that really quickly, I think, speaks volumes as to how things are changing. Or should things have changed in the past? Probably, yes. But I think that, we're making changes now. And I think that, you use the word aperture. I think that we, through Tide have a really wide angle aperture, but at the same time, I know nothing about photography, but maybe we have that super zoom telephoto lens at the same time in each of the 5 pillars in order to make sure that it's not just, broad, but deep. Because once again, our fiduciary duty compels us to get the best outcomes, and diverse teams have, produce the best outcomes.
Thank you. And I do applaud you for the diverse makeup of your team. And what advice would you give organizations who may want to achieve this as well to make it happen?
Something that we're focused on is, we have an active internship program. I think that's important. We have 3 interns on staff who have kind of been graduates of the intern program, which I think is fantastic. It's something that we're looking to grow. Hopefully we'll have, we even had a virtual intern who I've never met in person, but who's, a full-time member of the team now. Hopefully, we have 1 intern now who's finishing up, his semester. We have a couple hopefully for next semester. So I think that's one aspect. I think as we look to recruit and add to the team, I think we have to explore as many avenues as possible. It's not just, once again, posting, a resume canvas at, the same, 5 schools. So I think that we need to be mindful of how we post opportunities. I'm proud of, for example, organizations that we're affiliated with, Twigo, for example, where we have some Twigo fellows on staff here. I think that's, fantastic. But I think that once again, this goes to, our advocacy and our affiliations with organizations that look to bring in folks into the investment industry that, make all of us better, that expand the nature of discourse, challenge, our thinking, because that leads to kind of better investment decisions. So I think that every organization can do it, but you got to push yourself. You can't just do what you did, same as last year mindset. You got to kind of, think a little differently, and it's not hard. Just apply yourself a little, and you'll benefit. You'll only benefit. There's only upside. So why wouldn't you want to increase your upside?
Definitely. And I would say that it's about investing too. We talked about investing in the unknown. It's also about investing in people, and maybe they don't have that top 5 school or whatever all the other requirements are, but it is investing in those people, and it's also cultivating your own talent and growing it from within as well.
And on that point, Betty, I think that, once again, it's a credit to what you're doing, but there's a notion of, are we looking at the right metrics? And it's something that you probably know better than I do, but there's that book Grit, this concept that there are other aspects other than, GPA or whatever it is. And, if my kids are listening to this, you do need to get that high GPA. That's important. No excuses. But there's that notion of grit, and some of the most successful hires that I've made in my career are the people with the most grit. And I've probably learned the most from people that have, challenged themselves and have this kind of this drive. But it's about grit. That's something that we don't properly, evaluate, and it's something that hopefully we can better evaluate with kind of big data technology and you name it. But grit is so essential to building a great team, to world-class teams.
Indeed. So thank you for that. And now it's time for our CIO to CIO question. And this question is from Charmel Maynard. He's the Chief Investment Officer of the University of Miami. And he asked the following: if you had to choose one asset class to overweight over the next decade, which one would it be and why?
Yes, is my answer. It wouldn't be Bitcoin. It wouldn't be SPACs. I don't know if those are asset categories. I think it's not kind of the bubble or the investment du jour. I think that's something that I'm always, reluctant to embrace. What would I overweight over the next decade? Maybe it's infrastructure. I don't really have a great answer because whatever I say is precisely wrong. Because I can't time travel, and maybe if I could, I would come back and. But I think that if this is a more inflationary environment, if we do need to kind of bolster our digital footprint, you name it, I think that there are a lot of opportunities out there, or there's this tremendous need for it. So I guess that's my answer. I wish I had, once again, something that was much more precise, because I don't. I once again, I'm a firm believer, in my 3 kids, strategic asset and allocation. That's what I would overweight and make sure that it's properly diversified. So, I'm providing a bad answer, but it's something that, I feel comfortable, because I don't want anyone, not that anyone's going to listen to me, but I know that I don't want to be precisely wrong. So I'll leave it there.
Great. Strategic asset allocation it is. Now, I'd like to ask you a few personal questions. What is a book you would recommend to our listeners?
One of the benefits for being home more over the last years, I've read a lot more. I've had more free time. And I used to feel so much pressure to read books that were work-related. I just kind of felt this, and then, a lot of business books and investment books are a little bit droll. So what I've done over the last year, and I've probably read maybe more than I ever have in my life. I've probably, on average read, 2+ books a month. And the secret for me has been, it's okay to read a light spy novel. It's okay to alternate something that isn't, I love historical fiction. I love history. I love things that are kind of work related. But I think you learn something from every book, be it a young adult book in terms of, this is influencing my kids, to that light spy novel to say, ooh, this prose is horrible. I have to make sure that my writing is okay and that people can understand what I'm saying. So I would say that what I've read recently that I've liked, I read Four Winds, I believe, which is good. I actually think that the Reese Witherspoon, I actually look at a lot of her book recommendations because they happen to be really good. So I read Four Winds. I'm reading Michael Lewis's new book. I just downloaded Boys in the Boat. That author has a new book out, and I thought Boys in the Boat was a fantastic book. What else have I read recently? I love stories of, human perseverance, like the endurance in near the South Pole. I think that or kind of epic mountain climbs that kind of run into problems. And once again, that human spirit and how it perseveres. I really enjoy books like that. I like military history. Those books are very interesting. I'm happy to come back with a list if you like, but I've changed how I've read and what I read, and I'm so much happier because it's not just business books.
So we publish a summer reading list each summer, and it's usually composed of book recommendations from like the podcast guests and some of our other speakers. So I'll share that with you. But I was thinking of launching the Excel book club, so then you can look up those recommendations as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Always looking for a good book.
Good. What is your favorite story or moment of experiencing cultural diversity?
You know, it's an interesting question, as all your questions are. I would say, if you think about, I don't know what the exact number is. You know, you may know that probably a supermajority, 75%, I don't know what the number is of Americans probably live within, 15 miles of where they were born. There's like some really high percentage. I don't know what the exact number is, and I'll give the benefit to my parents in that they encourage my sisters and me to explore the world, to explore, how and where we live. Have a sister who has lived in Hong Kong and London, another sister who's lived in, Australia. We've lived, in addition to New York and Maryland and New Mexico, here in Los Angeles. And I think that it's not a individual story, but it's more kind of having experiences of seeing different parts of the country, different parts of the world, and living in different places. And I think that makes you, deeper is the wrong word, it makes you kind of challenge your own conventions and norms and more open to opinions, thoughts from others. So I think that it's, it probably is, having lived in different places, I would say that maybe, so it's multiple moments. There have been certainly places I've been that have been very different. I mean, I remember being in Tibet in the mid-90s, and it was a stunningly different place to be. And maybe this is the story, I recall, whether this is a fiction in my own mind or not, I don't know at this point because I've maybe repeated the story. But I recall being kind of somewhere in the plateau, and that people that were very traditional Tibetan nomadic type of people, who traveled with their herd of yak, wearing, once again, in the mid-90s, a number 23 Chicago Bulls t-shirt. So if you look at like that stark difference between tradition, herd of yak, nomadic lifestyle, and the influence of Michael Jordan, so to speak, that somebody had a number 23, t-shirt on, that was something that kind of always struck me as how big and small the world are at the same time. Indeed.
What is the best advice you've ever received or advice that you would impart to others?
Wow. The best advice I ever got in my career is pretty simple, in that 24-hour rule. This comes from one of my mentors back in my private equity days. He said, it's really easy to react emotionally in a visceral way. It's better to sleep on it. Wait 24 hours. So, he referred to it as a 24-hour rule. So I would say that has, whether I follow it or not, I probably don't, but I wish I could. And maybe the other piece of advice is, I'll give you this guy like a twofer. I'll throw in an extra one, which is that I'm a baseball fan. I hate sports analogies, but I use them. You can be the reliever that comes in to face a batter or two, or I guess now you have to face three, throw that same pitch over and over again, may work for an inning. But, for a career, to be successful, you have to have, 4 or 5 pitches. Be complete, know when to throw the changeup, know, when to throw the fastball, the curveball. Sometimes, unfortunately, you have to throw it high and inside, but vary your pitches. Change your approach, and maybe the best advice also related to this is listen to your catcher, listen to your manager, listen to the players around you that maybe see the fact that you're not doing something. So I'd say that those may be the two. That's my twofer.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And thank you, John, so much for your time today and your insights. We really appreciate it. I really enjoyed the conversation. And thank you for LACERA's support of Accelerate Investors. It's much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Betty. This was fun. I tried to answer your questions. Hopefully I did. And I hope that you have a, fantastic, day. And once again, that we certainly at LACERA appreciate all that you do with Accelerate Investors.
Thank you for listening to part 2 of my interview with Jonathan Grabel. I look forward to seeing many of you at our Southwest Investor Insights Summit in Austin on March 31st. I'm Betty Salonique, founder and CEO of Accelerate Investors, and you've been listening to CIO Conversations. You can follow Accelerate Investors on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Thank you for listening.